Hi, hello, my name is Mayu Hanford. I'm a lecturer in Japanese Studies and Modern Languages in Cardiff University. Thank you very much for coming to the 10th Cardiff-Japanese online lecture series, exploring social-cultural aspect of Japanese language learning. We also would like to say thank you for the Japan Foundation London to supporting this lecture series. The purpose of this Cardiff-Japanese Lecture Series is to share contemporary relevant information and to understand cultural context for recognizing the multifaceted aspect of Japanese society in a broader sense. We aim to explore socio-cultural aspect of Japanese learning for those studying Japanese language and culture, as well as various learners, teachers and researchers with an interest in Japan. The 10th event in the Cardiff-Japanese Lecture Series today, this time with Dr. Abhik Chakraborty. He's from Wakayama University in Japan. Dr. Chakraborty will give us the lecture on landscape history and challenges for environmental sustainability in protected areas of Japan, insights from the North Japan Alps, Shiretoko Peninsula, and Shirakami Mountains. While the talk, you can give us your questions regarding the lecture using the Q&A function. Please type the question in the Q&A box. Then after the lecture finishes, we will review all the questions and you can upvote other audience questions so that we can prioritize the question. Please do not type your question in the chat box. Also, in the webinar, all your microphones will be muted, and this webinar is being recorded, and a recorded session video will be in the Cardiff-Japanese online lecture series YouTube channel. I'll be putting a link to you in the chat box later. Now, let me introduce today's lecturer, Dr. Chakraborty's profile to you. Okay, so Dr. Abhik Chakraborty works for the Center for Tourism Research at Wakayama University in Japan. He has worked as the lead editor and author for Springer's Natural Heritage of Japan, the first edited monograph in English on the geology, geomorphology, and ecological aspect of the Japanese islands. He has also edited the Routledge volume, Rivers and Society. He researches critical change pathways in mountain environment, geoecological interactions in highlands, anthropogenic change in protected areas, UNESCO natural heritage sites, and highland watersheds to understand how humans affect Earth's surface processes in the Anthropocene. Okay, so hello, Dr. Chakraborty.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Hi. Hello. Yeah,
Hi.
I can. Can you hear me?
Thank you for, yeah, I can hear you amazingly beautifully. Yeah, thank you so much. And then, so I stopped sharing my slide, so you can now share your slide. And then if you're ready, please start your lecture.
Okay. Can you see my slide on the, the slideshow view? Is that fine?
Not yet, no.
I cannot see anything yet.
Not yet. Okay, just a second. Oh, I have to share screen, I guess. And then I have to push this one and then share, and then the slideshow. I guess this works.
Yeah,
yep,
that's
working now.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Right. So thank you, Mayu, for the introduction. I'm Abhik. I'm at the Faculty of Tourism now, not at the Center for Tourism Research. That was my previous incarnation. So I'm now Associate Professor at the Faculty of Tourism in Wakayama University. And today I will talk about landscape history and challenges for environmental sustainability in protected areas of Japan. And I will draw from inside, my research insights in North Japan Alps, Shiretoko Peninsula, and Shirakami Mountains. Well, when I started preparing for this webinar, I was in a somewhat different mode than I am in today. So I left this protected areas term on the header. But today I will not be spending too much on the protected areas themselves or the protected area framework itself, but I will introduce you 3 places: North Japan Alps, Shiretoko, and Shirakami mountains. So on the left-hand side, top left, you can see a shot from North Japan Alps. This is Mount Tsurugi. I'm coming back from the summit and in the early spring. That's how it looks. And then the middle of the screen, you see a frozen lake in Shiretoko, where we were doing snowshoeing with my tourists. And on the right, you see the Shirakami Mountains, series of like moderately elevated mountains full of forests, right? So to start this lecture, I will, I cannot go to the next one. Okay, yeah. So I'll start with this brief question: what is Japan for you? So I know that many of you are learning Japanese language and culture. So maybe for some of you, Japan is the land of cherry blossoms, right? And for some of you, you would associate Japan with this brightly colored kimono clothing and Maiko-san walking the Kyoto streets, right? Now, some of you may instantly recognize Mount Fuji, one of the largest volcanoes on Earth and the symbol of Japan in many ways. And then some of you would also recognize this brightly neon-lit Akihabara district of Tokyo that is at the right-hand bottom right corner of this slide. And this is a symbol of the hyper-modern, super fast-paced Japanese urban life of today. Well, today we will talk about a somewhat different Japan, because rather than talking about Japan as a nation or you know, as a cultural entity, I will focus on the Japanese archipelago as a place, and in the sense that it has a geological history as well as an ecological history. So these are born out of a geological time since the base of this archipelago formed, and then these histories have been shaped through earth processes over deep time. So usually geological time is the older, the bigger scale, and then the deep time is kind of a little bit smaller, but still much longer compared to the human time scale. This is on what the ecosystems are raised and sustained. So if you look at the right-hand side graphic, you can see that Japan is actually located in a very interesting juncture on planet Earth, where there are 2 major marine slabs, the Pacific plate and the Philippine Sea plate, going down against the continental margin. And this creates a lot of volcanoes, and most of these Japanese archipelago, you see volcanoes dotting all over the landscape, right? And then, you know, uplift and crustal deformation and geomorphological attributes resulting out of these processes straddle these 2 scales. So together, they shape the natural heritage peculiarities or characteristics of the Japanese archipelago. So this kind of research, I think Mayu introduced our book at the beginning of the lecture. So we started doing this kind of research simply because there was no academic work in English about Japan's natural heritage characteristics. So this was an attempt to sketch the geological, geomorphological, and ecological profiles of some of the representative sites, and to understand the ecological tensions resulting out of development legacies of the 20th century, because Japan developed very, very rapidly within 100 years or so. And that has resulted in some ecological tensions. And this is going to be the most important keyword for today's talk. And I will show you how these ecological tensions persist even today and in what forms. So this strand of inquiry actually relates to this word Anthropocene. This has become a very, very well recognized word today. So Anthropocene is a shorthand for human changes in the geobiosphere, and we no longer can fully understand environmental change as a product of particular sociopolitical or socioeconomic settings, but we need a fuller understanding of ecological identities of different places on Earth are changing rapidly. And the Japanese archipelago, in this sense, offers a very pertinent case study. So regarding the Anthropocene, it has also, sociocultural and sort of economic sides. And, Anthropocene is mainly a geological concept, but it has also related ecological and social connotations. And, books like John McNeill's Something New Under the Sun portrayed Anthropocene as the 20th century and the onset of Anthropocene as once in a lifetime or once in ever event in the history of the Earth. And then this kind of treatise on pollution and sort of like harvesting the biosphere. This one is from Smil. So these kind of books have analyzed how the human species, how our species has changed the geobiosphere. And then this one is a recent work by DeMarco and others, and this shows that we are literally in the red. So regardless of wherever we are living at the moment, most of the places, most of your locations, on planet Earth are in red, and this red represents the global probabilities of species extinction. And Japan, as you can see from this graphic, is no different. So, of course, regarding Japanese environmental history, there has been a lot of research. And, in English language, you can see this kind of, works by Conrad Tutman on the environmental history. This is a more holistic, like general treatment of the Japanese economic development and environmental history. And then Stoll's, this one, Bad Water. This one is about, industrial pollution in the waterways. And Brett Walker, this is an excellent book on the lost wolves of Japan, the ecological simplification of forests and ecosystems, because wolves were exterminated, just like in North America by humans in the beginning of the 20th century. And then Esposito, his book is deals on ecological literacy in Japan, and kind of similar. Of course, in Japanese language, you can find similar resources as well. On the left, you probably know this one, Fukugo Osen. This is by Ariyoshi Sawako, and written in the same vein like The Silent Spring. And so this kind of, discussed this is written as a kind of a novel format, but this raises the complex chemical pollution in the post-war post-war Japan. And then Honda Katsuichi used to be a prolific reporter, and he kind of documented how Kushiro Shitsugen, Kushiro wetland, sort of changed due to development pressure very rapidly. And then this one is on Shirakami Sanchi Nebuka Makoto. I will also draw on his works a little bit later. I have been fortunate to interview him a couple of times. And then on the right side, you can see a much more recent foray into the environmental history of North Japan Alps. This is Kamikochi no Shizenshi. So this is a combined effort to portray environmental change in Kamikochi. Okay, so just to go back a little bit, so Japan, I see it as a unique place. Well, it's not unique because we say it's unique or someone says it's unique, but every place on Earth is unique. So in that sense, Finland is as unique as Japan, maybe. But, Japanese archipelago has a unique set of geological, geomorphological, and ecological characteristics. So just to explain that. So I already talked about this subduction zone, and this setting has resulted in intense crustal deformation and uplift. And continental crust has been raised to a height of 3,000 meters. For an island arc, this is very impressive because this is among the highest uplift rates on the planet. Yeah, I know Fujisan is 3,776, but Fujisan is not crustal deformation. It is it's a volcanic edifice, so I'm discounting that. Amplifying factors such as volcanism, its position at the northern end of the monsoon Asia region mean that Japan has a vigorous erosion regime compared to similar latitude locations elsewhere. Most surface rocks and landforms, though, are products of the Cenozoic. That's the current era after the extinction of the dinosaurs. So Japan is not very old geologically, but conspicuous landforms such as volcanoes, mountains, and uplifted land, mostly of Neogene Quaternary origin, give this a complex, unique identity. However, this geological identity kind of collided with a 20th century phase of rapid and intense anthropogenic disturbance, because Japan was also a frontrunner of industrialization from Asia, and this left an indelible mark on the ecosystems of the archipelago. Rapid simplification and fragmentation of ecological networks, widespread logging of natural forests and introduction of plantations, damming and engineering of all rivers, and intensive coastal development are some of the most conspicuous markers of environmental change in Japan. So the landscape histories we encounter in Japanese archipelago have continuities from geological past, but also some ruptures in the very recent past, which are mostly anthropogenic in nature. And these kind of complicate the way ecosystems and natural landscapes are perceived and managed. But even the anthropogenic ruptures are not simple monochrome or unidirectional events. They host a multitude of actors, nuances, and therefore are inherently plural in nature. So here I will just give a very brief and simplistic intro of protected areas. So national parks in Japan initially followed the American model, but sought to blend it with a somewhat simplistic goal of preserving vistas of landforms or landmarks for their touristic appeal. This is all very well described by Murakushi's excellent research on initial national park movement in Japan. In other words, there was no John Muir or a similar philosopher who would provide an overarching philosophical basis for setting aside wilderness areas, nor is any powerful autonomous body present like the American National Park Service for the management of the Japanese national parks. The Ministry of Environment is responsible, but it is a state organ. It's not autonomous, it's part of the state. And actual management is a bit complicated with different ministries like the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, and the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, having somewhat conflicting goals of management. However, this itself is again not a very simplistic tale. Side by side, Japan has civilian movements, and there were civilian movements against development in many places, and mostly these were protest movements against logging, construction schemes, or pollution. And some of the examples are like protest against a dam construction plan at Kamikochi, and then in Oze, and protest movements against logging at Shirakami Sanchi and Shiretoko. And, in first two instances, these movements led to the national park designation. And in the latter two instances, they became stirring points of the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation. So in a sense, that these civilian movements, became fruitful and sort of, merged in some senses, in some cases merged, in some cases initiated, state planning and management schemes to protect these areas. So protected areas in Japan are not simply results of state projects, but they harbor local ambitions and interactions between local and broader civil societies. So with this, I will dive into the first case study that I will offer you today. This is from my research site in North Japan Alps. I've been doing this research for 6-7 years now. So yeah, I I spend most of my summer off days walking along these ridge lines, start from the late spring and then continue into late autumn, and also occasionally on winter, where weather and conditions permit. So North Japan Alps, what kind of a place is it? Okay, so North Japan Alps is simultaneously an old and a new mountain chain. Oldest exposed rocks of the North Japan Alps date back to the Permian period, that is over 250 million years ago. And the base is inferred to be even older, with some occasional serpentinite melange dating back to over 500 million years located, among these sections. So these rocks, which you may occasionally encounter on Shiroumadake, actually predate the dinosaurs. However, they were exposed to the surface and uplifted through a very long process, with the major uplift phase beginning about 3.5 million years, and this continues today as we speak. Many surface features are products of glacial, periglacial, and paraglacial processes, and these processes, if you know the glacial history of the Japanese archipelago, these are not very old. The oldest, glacial cover on these mountains, it's only like 50,000 years ago, and then, further glaciation occurred during the last glacial maximum, and after the Holocene, that is about 11,600 years or so ago, fluvial and transport mechanisms have shaped major valleys and catchments in these mountains. Next, the human imprint. Okay, if you look at this photo, this is Kamikochi, and you are looking towards Hotakadake. The ridge line of Hotakadake formed about 1.6 to 1.5 million years ago, and then there is this kind of valley coming down, which was incised by retreating glaciers about 10,000, 11,000 years ago. And then there was a bridge built maybe like 50, 60, 100 years ago, and then a lot of people are thronging that bridge right now, right? So initial efforts to map and explore the North Japan Alps began during industrial modernization of the Meiji period. Before that, these mountains were divine places, although small-scale local forays were occasionally made, and even pre-industrial mining and logging evidences have been found. Usually, British engineer William Gowland is credited for coining the term Japan Alps, because he thought that they resembled the European Alps, and the missionary Walter Weston made these mountains popular in both Japan and abroad by scaling many prominent peaks. Even Japanese landscapists such as Kojima Usui were also drawn to the beauty of the major peaks, and Kojima Usui once commented that he wanted to climb Yarigatake because it has this kind of formidable appearance. So I'll continue with the human impact story. So beginning from the end of 19th century, road construction, hydroelectric projects on catchments, and construction of housing facilities at the foothills facilitated tourist access to these mountains. And you can see on the right-hand side, I just put a pamphlet there. It says like smooth to Kamikochi. So, and this lady is wearing very casual clothing and carrying a camera. So it kind of gives you the hint that any, urbanite is very welcome and would be at home in these mountains. So this kind of development further accelerated during the post-war economic boom and the associated expansion of roads and tunnels and bridges. Millions visit these mountains in the summer these days, and mountain huts regularly operate well beyond their capacities on major holidays. The post-war tourist rush to these mountains resulted in major environmental issues such as waste and vehicle exhausts, and this prompted a carb on private motorized access to Kamikochi Valley from 1975, which I think was the first in Japanese national parks. So ecological tensions to revisit one of the most important keywords of our presentation today, of our talk today, is although North Japan Alps are protected as a part of a national park, major trails and peaks have intense visitor footprint to the detriment of sensitive alpine ecosystems. In the Shiroumadake district alone, 400 plant species have been identified, and the mountains literally provide the last refugia for many of them. The major trail on this mountain was extensively damaged due to trampling and topsoil loss during 1970s and 80s, which prompted a recovery program in 1990s. And a similar alarm then was raised during the 1998 Winter Olympic Games in Nagano, when the mains race course was planned on sensitive alpine habitat. And there are dams on most of these intramountain catchments in North Japan Alps, and as a result, the ridgeline and downstream connectivity remains fragmented. So, you know, these are two very typical sites. If you go from Kamikochi towards Iarigatake on the left, you encounter this kind of river coming down from the mountains, and you can see it looks beautiful, but it's not quite natural, because you can see that this earth mover, this bulldozer, is actually fortifying the banks and rearranging the stones so that the river can flow in a desired state and does not become too unruly. So that's the point of having bulldozers here. And then on the right side, you can see that the trail goes right through alpine flower colonies. So if a lot of people walk through these trails, these kind of flower colonies can easily get damaged. They are damaged in many places due to that. So what needs to be done for North Japan Alps? Well, this is an ongoing research, so I don't know the answer honestly. I will also like to leave it as an open question for today. But here are some hints. On the left-hand side, you see a photograph where you can see three very different geological timings represented in one shot, one frame. The faraway ridgeline was formed 1.6 million years ago through upliftment and caldera subduction, and then you see reddish part, buttress-like smaller ridge formation, which is active, which features active volcanism as of today. And then you see this kind of crater. A mountain used to stand here, but it was blown apart by a sudden explosion, and this crater remains from this event that took place about 10,000 years ago. But hardly tourists notice this, hardly guides tell them about this continuity, about this kind of different times being present in the same landscape. On the right hand side, on the top right, I think I have to go back. Yeah, on the top right, you see a valley that was formed by ridgeline collapse from these mountains during the glacial age, after the glaciers retreated, to be precise. And then you can see a tiny patch of snow that obdurately remained when I photographed this place late summer. This is Suishodake in the deepest part of North Japan Alps. I mean, how does this kind of snow patch interact with the vegetation around it, or what kind of animals depend on this snow cover? What will happen if climate change progresses and these snow patches are lost forever? These kind of questions have not been adequately studied even in research, and much less so in tourism and by visitors. So just another hint is like this rock face looks formidable and kind of like covered in ice, snow, and this ice and snow, when it thaws, it kind of drags these rocks down, and this is a different face, of course, and these rocks fall down, and you can see them strewn on the trail. They said that these are hazards and so on, but actually this is the dynamism of the North Japan Alps. That is how this place is forming. So to cut it short, to erect barrier, it will be to cut short the evolutionary history of this place. So this is something that we need to be aware of, and managers need to be aware of, visitors need to be aware of. So yeah, I mean, if you are interested in going to North Japan Alps, try to see it from this angle. Yeah, so that is North Japan Alps. So I will go to Shiretoko in Hokkaido next. So Shiretoko, if you know this place, Hokkaido is here, and Shiretoko is in the northeast turn part of Hokkaido. So this is a peninsula. So it extends about 70 kilometers into the Pacific, and it is geologically, Shiretoko is part of the Chiishima Arc, and Chiishima is a result of Pacific plate subduction at the continental margin and volcanic front formation, and it has happened since like about 9 million years ago. So it's not very old again. And Chiishima volcanism features like episodic volcanism and quaternary land volcanoes like Shiretoko Renzan. The highland also forms the key for radial drainage pattern that connects marine ecosystems to mountains and forests, which eventually became the key word for registering it as a World Natural Heritage Site. The tip of the peninsula is narrow and is shaped by intense uplift and crustal deformation. It's a landscape that precluded sustained human settlement. Southernmost location of the drift ice in northern hemisphere, that is Shiretoko, and this drift ice itself is a product of far away Amur River watershed drainage and advective winds and ocean currents. So you can see that hugely complex set of earth processes have operated through geological time to set up this place for you or for us or for the animals or plants that live there, right? So this is a view of the sea ice for you approaching towards us. We are standing on a road in Utaro, and we can see this kind of sea ice drifting towards us. So this is how it looks like. And then, this red jacket guy is me, and I'm working with my students on a frozen lake in Shiretoko, and we can see this kind of central Shiretoko highland, Shiretoko Renzan, which is the product of volcanism in the quaternary. So the ecological profile of this peninsula is that drift ice in winter allows for diatom flux, and when the ocean warms up, floating masses of diatoms attract a range of predators, from small fish to birds to cetaceans that travel from across hemispheres. There are over 80 small streams flowing from the mountains, many of which attract migrating salmonids, as well as local fish species such as the Dolly-Virgin trout. And this fish species has persisted since the last glacial maximum. That is kind of for 10,000 years, this Dolly-Virgin has been living here. So I'll show you the Dolly-Virgin in a moment. 871 plant species are identified in the area, out of which 97 are threatened, including the Shiretoko sumire. It's kind of a flower that, blooms on the rocks kind of thing. The area is also home to home and winter migration points for endangered species such as Blakiston's fish owl and the stellar seagull. So Blakiston's fish owl is the largest fish owl species in the world, and stellar seagull is the largest eagle. And it's among the last contiguous habitats of the brown bear. It means Shiretoko is among the last contiguous habitats of the brown bear. So the Dolly-Virgin trout, doesn't it look beautiful? So, and then on the right side, you can see, salmonids journeying upriver to spawn. So these kind of ecological networks are present in Shiretoko. And then Shiretoko became a national park in 1964, and in 2005, it was inscribed onto the World Heritage List. 60% of the national park territory falls under special protection zone and is effectively protected under law. However, many connectivities that link the marine and terrestrial ecosystems have become fragmented over the years. Natural salmon runs are increasingly hampered due to stationary nets in the coast, and there are even salmon capture stations at river mouths inside or adjacent to the World Heritage property. Logging and land conversion that peaked in Hokkaido between the 1960s and 1980s extensively fragmented natural forests. This was a major finding described by this important paper by Shoyama and Braimo in 2011, and notably riparian forests were affected, to such an extent that there are not enough large trees suitable for natural breeding environment of the endangered Blakiston's fish owl. So yeah, so who likes a salmon? I think this guy loves it, but the problem is that he lives in the mountains. And if you look at this graphic on the right, these black dots are salmon capture stations. So these stations do not allow salmon to go into the mountains. So this guy has to travel down and down and down into the local settlements and almost near the cities. So sometimes there is real tension due to this ecological tension. And some of the bears have been shot for being too close to humans. Continuing with ecological tensions, currently there are numerous eco-tour packages in the area, such as marine wildlife watching and trekking and snowshoeing. However, a number of tour operators used to be fishermen who trawled the Sea of Okhotsk for lucrative catches in the past, until one of the most profitable species, the Alaskan walleye pollock, it's known as a Siketsodara. So it spectacularly crashed in the 1990s, and it left many without a sizable income. So this turn of events prompted some to take up tourist guiding as an alternative. However, the value set that they had initially, that of maximal exploitation of natural resources, remains today. And this is evidenced by baiting of endangered seagulls for photography enthusiasts. You can see these couple of seagulls. These are the largest eagles on the planet. You can see them stopping on the breakwater, and if you look closely, probably you can see this fish that was thrown to them by the tour operator that was guiding us. Black-eastern fish owl on the right, sitting out of a branch. So yeah, trees for nesting are increasingly rare. I mean, there are efforts to replant the forest, but still the fish owl is very much dependent on artificial nest boxes for breeding as of today. So from our research, which we did for last 4 or 5 years, we found that the past and current fragmentation in Shiretoko affects forest composition to an extent where key species cannot breed, hunt, and disperse at appropriate scales. And then it also affects biomass circulation in waterways, means rivers, that support local biodiversity. So we noted that the current practice of awarding endangered status only to apex predators like black-eastern fish owl will not be helpful, because the food chain that it depends on is unprotected, and it should also be protected or meaningfully conserved in order to make sure that the black-eastern fish owl survives. The World Natural Heritage Site Management should also push back against perennial pressures for developing surrounding areas, be it for tourism or for local satisfaction, and so on. And it would be necessary to establish and safeguard corridors for key species movement. So this was the findings of our research. It was published in a paper, and I'm deeply thankful to my colleague Takeshi Takenaka, who is one of the foremost experts on fish owl in the world, and he astutely guided me for these years in Shiretoko. So yeah, that's much for Shiretoko. Then we move to our final destination, Shirakami-sanchi, next. Well, it does not show up on this screen, but on the left hand you can see a map, and if you can see if you can follow my cursor, Shirakami-sanchi is round about here. At the leftmost part of this map, and then looking towards the mountains, it looks something like this in summer. Shirakami-sanchi is known for Buna, Seabold's beech forest, and Buna is a tree that loves this kind of moist, snowy environment, and it colonized Japanese archipelago since about the last glacial maximum, after the last glacial maximum, like about 9,000, 10,000 years back. And this forest is said to have remained in kind of that same condition for these 8,000 years. Of course, the tree is not 8,000 years old. The Buna can grow only up to 400, most 500 years maybe, but not most Buna is like 200-300 years of age, and these huge specimens, you can see them on if you take a walk in the forest. And this is the Akaishi River watershed, and you can see a natural Buna forest here. And every now and then you run into this kind of spectacular lakes and sort of like ponds in the mountain. This is Jiuniko in Akita. It looks really, beautiful, like ink blue water. And this is a place like this. So the ecological profile of Shirakami-sanchi. So 170 square kilometers of this Buna forest, Fegas crenata, is now registered under World Heritage status. It is the largest remaining old-growth natural forest in any of the 4 main islands, and also it is one of the largest beech forests surviving in Asia. So this forest, as I said, survived in relatively unmodified condition for around 8,000 years. So it's a relict ecosystem as well. However, this is the key. The original extent of Shirakami Sanchi used to be 1,300 square kilometers, and only 170 square kilometers remain today. So this 1,300 square kilometers used to be near unmodified Buna forest even a century back. This all changed in the 20th century, and during I wrote it mid-late, but it started from early 20th century, and then early to mid to late 20th century, the forests were rapidly logged off. And throughout the 20th century, beech was seen as a worthless species and a problem for forests, because it did not, the woods has too much water in it and it does not serve any purpose. So beech was aggressively logged and replaced with conifer plantations all over Japan. And in 1978, a plan to run a forestry road through the last remaining core of the forest was proposed. And this led to a protest movement from the locals, a section of whom is also known as the Matagi. Maybe some of you know this word. Matagi is the name for traditional hunter-gatherers. They kind of like practiced this foraging lifestyle until that time. So the protest gathered momentum, and eventually the road construction plan was halted. And in 1993, Shirakami Sanchi became a World Natural Heritage Site. And then, lo and behold, immediately after the World Heritage designation, the same beech that was dubbed worthless became magnificent. Several old specimens were shown off to tourists, and the Matagi lifestyle was romanticized and offered as a cultural experience. Even Matagis themselves moved away from hunting and foraging and became like tourist guides in many cases. In the meantime, the black bears that they hunted declined in number throughout Japan and became a kind of threatened species. In Shirakami Sanchi, there are a lot of black bears, but if you look at the black bear ecological history over Japanese archipelago in general, then these species have been drastically reduced in number, and their range has been truncated to a great extent. To an extent, the idealization of the Matagi as the guardians of this forest is perhaps related to tales of bravery of able-bodied male protagonists against the elements and fierce animals, and is perhaps related to some hidden symbolic justification of human and in this sense, mostly male domination of the wild or feminine nature. So it's not only particular to Japan, but I think there was an interesting article about polar bear tourism in the Arctic Circle, which in which the authors also provided this analogy that the wild polar bear is feminine, or was turned into a feminine spectacle for the kind of consumption of tourists who tourists of course included both men and women, but the reference plane from which they were watching the polar bear was like the masculine domination of the landscape. So accordingly, most local narratives of the forest of Shirakami Sanchi are framed predominantly in cultural terms, and there is little recognition of the crisis that led to its inscription as World Natural Heritage Property. So there are continued problems like the romanticization of the hunter and the peripheralization of the hunted, and this poses a challenge to understand the troubled non-human voices in the landscape. Even some former Matagi hunters disapproved of this. One Matagi described the forest as kind of weak and reduced in its vitality and as constrained by human design. Check dams on the Akaishi River watershed were mentioned as major blockages for ecosystem connectivity, and fish migration, sandbar formation patterns in rivers, and mushroom variety decline. Sorry, this should have been a space bar here, but yeah. Typo. A main part of the Matagi diet is mushrooms, so these kind of changes were observed as notable transformations in the forest. So the Matagi does not see the forest in a scientific way. So he did not kind of provide a very precise, exact measurement of what changed, but it's pretty common to traditional knowledge, right? So they see the forest as something, and they can sense the transformation in the forest. And this was the case when I interviewed this Matagi hunter. He understood the forest has changed, but he kind of struggled to put it in words in exactly how it changed. Other signs, such as disproportionately large wears on streams, a dam just outside the natural heritage property, and construction of new roads are readily visible even to the casual outsider who visits this place. So further issues, just to briefly mention this, there is insufficient focus on natural disturbance and connectivity processes in the landscape. So natural disturbance such as hill slope movement and erosion is fundamental for species like Buna and the sort of forest that grows on this landscape. So this happens because Shirakami Sanchi has a landform profile where heavier igneous rocks sit atop the softer depositional base layer, and there is heavy snowfall. So this eventually results in streams flowing through the landscape, and it cuts through the upper part of the soil. And when it reaches the softer bedrock down below, the whole mountain can slide or can sort of like collapse. It looks like collapse, but it's actually how nature works and how ecosystems are made and nurtured. This is not a violent process. This is not something that is bad for nature. This is how the forest has operated across its entire 8,000 years of ecological history. So this is a continuity that spans from late Jurassic to today, and specifically for over 8,000, 10,000 years, over which this Buna forest came to establish itself on this landscape. But it is increasingly perturbed due to the short-sighted engineering and hazards discourses of the human society. So these fundamental mechanisms need to be looked after for the continued well-being of Shirakami Sanchi. So these were the 3 case studies. So I think I kind of rushed through them because of the time constraint. So I will leave with a final slide. And here again, I talk about the ecological tension and the need to understand that tension. So from this talk, I want to emphasize that in order to gain a fuller understanding of any place, it's not only about Japan, but any place that you take care to observe or understand, it is not enough to understand its polity or its culture or its economy, but we should also pay attention to its ecological history, or multiple ecological histories for that matter. As we saw from these 3 examples, these are some of the last remaining refugia for these valuable and rich ecosystems that are found in Japanese archipelago. These ecosystems and the species that inhabit these ecosystems have been there across geological time. They have been there much, much before we came onto the scene. And I think our species has no right to cut short their evolutionary history and their right to live in these landscapes. But in the past 100 years or so, these landscapes have been fragmented, peripheralized, and pushed to the limit in some cases. There are some ongoing efforts, of course, to raise awareness and conserve some of them. And such efforts are very valuable, but they also need to be redoubled and broadened in scope in the Anthropocene. In order to understand the challenges that we face today, and not only, particularly Japan, but for like any hyper-industrial society, like those in Europe or in the States, I mean, there are many commonalities that we can draw from these case studies. So I hope that this talk will give you a new, if somewhat unfamiliar angle to look at the Japanese archipelago. So that's all for my presentation today. I had a reference slide. Yes, here it is. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Chakraborty, for a fantastic lecture. So I'm sure some of you are kind of checking the references, so I'll leave this for another five seconds, and then let's move on to the Q&A section. Okay, so there are 2 questions, Dr. Chakraborty. One is from Alex, and
Okay.
another audience upvoted this question. And Alex said, hello, you mentioned the areas like Shiretoko are protected under law, but I was wondering how effective or how sufficient you feel the laws are. You noted sometimes nets are cast even inside the heritage area, so are the laws taken particularly seriously?
Yeah, I mean, nets are, to be, precise, the stationary nets are actually outside the perimeters of the natural heritage area. But the law, if you know the Japanese system, it's like the Ministry of Environment protects the national park, but the waterways, the rivers, fall under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism. So the Ministry of Environment doesn't have a single the overall jurisdiction of all parts of the property, and that's why even in protected areas you can catch fish. These days it is mostly catch and release, but it's permitted to catch fish in the rivers, because there are two different ministries and they have kind of conflicting goals. And then most of the land in the national parks are owned by is owned by the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, and they also are responsible for harvesting some of the forest. So yeah, I mean, laws are there, but sometimes there are different mandates, of different ministries, and perhaps most importantly, these laws cover only some sections of the area which are given protected status, but the ecological networks actually are bigger than the protected area, right? So that's where we see a lot of fragmentations occurring, because Shiretoko Peninsula, the whole peninsula is there, right? And the ecological network spans the whole peninsula, but only a part, only 71,000 hectares of the peninsula is protected under the World Heritage and the National Park Scheme. Yeah. I hope that answers. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you, Dr. Chakraborty, and then I'll move on to the Gina's message for you. And Gina said, not a question, just thank you for bringing geology to the forefront of current understandings of Japan. Your book is a nice present-day complement to what I have presented in my book on tectonic archaeology.
Wow. I look forward to reading that. If you can send me the title or a link, I would absolutely love to read that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, please, Gina, please send Dr. Chakraborty. You can send a link to our chat box if you want, Gina, about your book here. Thank you so much. Okay, and then we've got another question from Jamie. What is being done to measure or monitor biodiversity in protected areas?
Yeah, I mean, monitoring is there. I mean, the Ministry of Environment has its own monitoring scheme, and they monitor key species. Like, if you go to Shiretoko and ask them, what is the problem here, or what kind of issues do you see in the natural environment, they will readily supply you the information that there is too much deer. So the deer numbers are kind of monitored, and they're doing controlled removal of some deers and so on. So key species numbers are monitored, but there are practical difficulties. For example, like the bears, right? These kind of brown bears, they live in the deeper part of the peninsula, and there are not many roads going there. You can monitor them from the boat when they come out for foraging in the spring or summer, but bear mothers give birth in hibernation in winter. So how many bear cubs were born could be a challenge to count, unless they have grown enough and are able to come to the seaside with their mother for a stroll, right? So these kind of, and even more difficult to count the number of, salmon species in a river, right? So it's kind of pretty difficult, but there are some monitoring schemes based on species count and sort of biomass in the river, and these kind of schemes are there. Yeah, it's not completely non-existent, but even science often does not know exactly how ecosystems operate, because they're so complex. And so, current efforts, not only in Japan, but all over the world, to understand these kind of species, intraspecies, interspecies interactions are insufficient and needs to be redoubled or tripled. Yeah.
Okay, so shall we move on to the next question? Sia Smith, thank you for your interesting presentation. A bit of a broad question, but I wonder how popular is environmental protection, nature conservation across Japanese society? I used to live in Mie, and I was struck with how important nature was in terms of Shinto festivals, etc. Compared to my home country, Ireland, do you think nature is more valued as a result?
That is a relative, it is kind of, to what extent it's very difficult to answer this question objectively, because it will always be relative. Seen from which angle would we judge that there is a high interest of nature conservation? I mean, there will always be greater or lesser cases. But what I feel is that, as I also mentioned, that there were many civilian movements of protests against pollution and, dam construction and logging and so on. And some of these movements duly bore fruition and became, resulted in national parks or protected areas. And so, yeah, I mean, there has been a trend of, there has been, a history of civilian engagement with these areas. However, it's not only particularly Japan, but younger generation today suffers from what is a kind of a declining baseline syndrome. So they go to a forest which has been altered over 40 years, but they see it as the only forest that they encounter. They cannot see a forest which is like which remains in its original or unfragmented state for about 100 years or so. So sometimes the memory of nature that they have, or their fathers have, or even their grandfathers have, is actually human modified nature. So we see that very often in the industrialized and developed world, because the most important parts of the ecosystem were simplified hundreds of years ago. Like wolves are exterminated 100 years or so back, and therefore the apex predator controlling that ecosystem is no longer there. And not only in Japan but in North America, until they reintroduced wolves in the Yellowstone, right? So I mean, this is a huge debate or huge topic to delve into. What would count as nature, and how would people feel affinity to it? Do people feel affinity to the nature that is read in tooth and claw? To what extent? This is a very difficult question to answer, and I am afraid there is no answer that I can readily give up. But thank you for raising this important question. It can really lead off to discussion or brainstorming later on, I hope. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have another question from Chris. Chris, can I hand my microphone to you?
Yep, thank you. This is going to be quite a big question. Maybe you won't be able to answer it all in the remaining time, so please feel free to email it to me afterwards. And it's two kind of slightly different things. So, I mean, of all the images you showed, the one that horrified me the most was the one where you showed the eagles which are being fed by fish. I mean, whenever I've been to environmental type tourism, so seeing dolphins or whales, this has been in this country or in the United States, there's always been the understanding you can't approach animals, you can't do things. If they approach you, that's one thing. It seems as though that understanding, that procedure is not existing in Japan. And this, I guess, ties into that first question from which was talking about laws. I'm wondering, I mean, I get there are tensions in rural areas. They want income, they want tourism, but equally, that's not helping with the environmental protection. I'm also wondering, on the flip side of this, are you seeing any cases where places don't want to become UNESCO heritage sites and get protection because they don't want to be restricted at all? A final question I have, because I know we are up against time, so don't worry if you can't answer this one. I'm wondering to what degree things like novels and movies play any part in the environmental movement from your experience in Japan, in terms of either positive or negative, that people see something beautiful in a Japanese film and think, oh, I want to visit there, or they understand the importance of protecting the environment and actually they need to keep well clear. Sorry, very big general questions in the end.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I should clarify that it's not that like there is no existence of this awareness that you should not approach animals in Japanese society. It's not that simple, because there is tension between like the tour operators and the local society, and many of the local inhabitants openly disapprove of baiting the eagles, and they say like, they are only baiting them for like tourist dollars or tourist yen, right? So I mean, you know, the society, human society is very complex, right? So a section of the tour operators feel the urge to show off this kind of iconic species through baiting, and this is not inherent, or it's not how it was always there in this area, but because maybe of the heritage designation, a lot of tourists came, and some of the tour operators were able to use this loophole where you can bait these species if you are outside the perimeters of the protected area. So this is a kind of also a legal problem, and also a problem for motivation that needs to be addressed. And I'm sure that this happens not only in Japan, and I mean many other places also, right? Yeah, the question to what extent movies and novels can influence nature conservation discourses, or public willingness towards nature conservation. I remember this kind of example, like Mononoke Hime, the Ghibli studio film that was made on, and it used the Shiratani Unsuikyo Gorge in Yakushima as the backdrop to create that forest of Mononoke Hime. And immediately after that film, I think interest in Yakushima and Shiratani Unsuikyo shot up, and still a lot of guides introduce that place as Mononoke Hime no Mori. So it is there. Media is a very, very powerful agent of fostering and developing public perception towards nature, or towards nature conservation. I think we're running out of time. Does that answer your question even partially? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chakraborty. So unfortunately, we passed the 1 o'clock already, so we need to say goodbye to everybody. But thank you so much for your amazing lecture. And then we would like to be very grateful if you could complete the survey to tell us what did you think about, thought about this lecture and series and things. And then the survey will be automatically sent to you. So please complete them. And please visit Cardiff-Japanese Online Lecture Series YouTube channel. I put the link in here in the chat box. And also, next webinar hasn't been scheduled yet, but it would be probably in end of January or in February time. So we'll let you know the information as soon as we schedule the next one. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for coming to the webinar today. And please have a nice day today. And then Dr. Chakraborty, so I'll see you. Hopefully I can see you soon in Japan, maybe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure
Thank you so much.
today.
Sayonara.
Sayonara.